Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, Daf 13b, and because of the time, we stopped at the very bottom of 13a, so we're starting at the bottom of 13a with the words Iboyes Ema, Rabbi Nassan. And if you wish, say, Rabbi Abba's ruling is in accordance with Rabbi Nassan, it is only there that the owner of the damaged ox can say to the owner of the pit, since I found my ox in your pit, ultimately you bear the responsibility for any damage. And therefore, whatever I cannot recover from the other one, in other words, the owner of the ox, I will recover from you. Starting at the top of 13b with the words Aval Hacham. But here, in the case of damage caused by an animal consecrated as a peace offering, is the injured party actually able to say only the meat of the animal caused damage, but the sacrificial portions did not cause damage? Since the entire animal caused the damage, he does not collect the full cost of the damage from the meat portions of the one who brought the offering. Amarava, Toda Shehizika, Gova Mibisara Ve'eno Gova Milchama. Rava says, in the case of an innocuous animal consecrated as a thanks offering that caused damage, the injured party collects damages from its meat, in other words, from the portion of the offerings that would have been eaten by the one who brought the offering, but he does not collect from its bread, in other words, from the offering of the 40 loaves of bread that accompanies the sacrifice of the animal. The Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that he does not collect from the bread? The bread is not part of the animal that caused damage. The Gemara answers, it was necessary for Rava to state this because of the latter clause, Seifa itzrichle, Nizak ochel basar u'mischaper mevi lechem. It was necessary for Rava to state this because of the latter clause of his ruling, which states the injured party eats the meat portions of the offering according to the value of the damages owed to him, but the one achieving atonement, in other words, the one bringing the offering, brings the bread. The Gemara asks, Hanami Pshita, isn't this also obvious? Why should anyone else bring the bread? The Gemara explains, lest you say, since the bread is a necessary qualifying factor for the thanks offering, as without it one does not fulfill one's obligation, let the owner of the offering say to the one eating it, why should you eat the meat and I bring the bread? If you wish to eat, you should bring the bread. Therefore, Rava teaches us that the offering of the loaves of bread is the obligation of the owners of the offering. Nechasim shehein shel b'nei bris. The Mishnah teaches one is liable only for damage caused to property that belongs to members of the covenant. The Gemara asks, this clause serves to exclude what? If it serves to exclude the property of a Gentile, isn't that already explicitly taught in the Mishnah below, in 37b, in the case of an ox of a Jew that gored an ox of a Gentile? The Jew is exempt? The Gemara answers, the Tana teaches this as a principle in the Mishnah here, and then explains it in greater detail in the Mishnah below. The Mishnah concludes, one is liable only for nechasim hamiyuchadim, assigned property. The Gemara asks, this clause serves to exclude what? Rav Yehuda said, this clause serves to exclude a case in which an animal is injured, but it is unclear which of two oxen owned by different people caused the damage. The owner of this ox says to the owner of the other, your ox caused the damage, and the owner of that ox says to the owner of the other, your ox caused the damage. Since it cannot be proven which ox actually caused the damage, neither owner is liable. I would think both owners are liable. They should both pay half. Anyway, they say neither is liable. The intention of the Mishnah is that one is liable only where the belligerent ox is assigned to, in other words, is known to be the property of a specific individual. The Gemara asks, isn't that explicitly taught in the Mishnah below, 35a? If two oxen were seen pursuing a single ox, and then the single ox is found to be injured, and the owner says to this ox, the owner of this ox says to the owner of the other, your ox caused the damage, and the owner of that ox says to the owner of the other, your ox caused the damage. In such a case, both of them are exempt, since it is uncertain which one is guilty. The Gemara answers, the Tana teaches this as a principle in the Mishnah here, and then explains it in greater detail in the Mishnah above. It was taught in a Brisa, in explanation of the Mishnah, that the term assigned property serves to exclude ownerless property. The Gemara clarifies what are the circumstances in which the Mishnah teaches that one is exempt. If we say it is referring to a case where an ox belonging to us, in other words, to a Jew, gored an ownerless ox, it is obvious that the owner bears no liability, as who is claiming damages from him? Rather, it must be referring to a case where an ownerless ox gored an ox belonging to us, and it teaches that the injured party does not have a right to damages. The Gemara asks, what is the point of this halacha? If the injured party wishes to recover his losses, let him go and take the belligerent ox for himself, since it is currently ownerless. The Gemara explains, the Mishnah teaches that the injured party does not have any right to the ox, in order to teach that in a case where another person preceded him and acquired it, the injured party has no claim to it. Ravina said in alternative interpretation of the Mishnah, the term assigned property serves to exclude a case in which an ox gored and subsequently its owner consecrated it, or when it gored and subsequently its owner declared it ownerless. Since the owners did not own the ox at the time the case was brought before the court, they are exempt from paying. Ravina explains that this is the intention of the Mishnah. One is liable only when the property that caused the damage is owned by a responsible party, both when it caused the damage and when it was tried. In this case, at the time of the court hearing, it was not owned by a responsible party, as it was either consecrated or ownerless. It is also taught in a brisa, the halacha is that an ox that kills a person is stoned to death. The Mishnah states in 44b that this does not apply to an ox consecrated to the temple or an ownerless ox. Moreover, Rabbi Yehuda said, even if an ox gored and its owner subsequently consecrated it to the temple, or if an ox gored and its owner subsequently declared it ownerless, the owner is exempt from liability, as it is stated. And if the ox was wont to gore in time past, and had been forewarned with its owner, and he had not guarded it in, and it killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and also its owner shall be put to death. Exodus 21:29. The repetition of the reference to the owner at the time of the death of the victim and at the time of the owner's standing trial is the same. In other words, the ox is owned by a responsible party for both events. The Gemara asks, but do we not also require that the ox's status be the same at the time of the verdict? Isn't the phrase, the ox shall be stoned, written with regard to the time of the verdict? Rather say that the owner of the ox is exempt unless the ox's status as the owner's property at the time of the death of the victim and at the time of the owner's standing trial at the verdict is the same. In other words, the ox is owned by a responsible party for all three events. The Mishnah teaches one is liable for damage caused in any place except for a domain designated exclusively for the use of the one responsible for the damage. The Gemara explains the reason for this. This is because the one liable for the damage can say to the injured party, what did your ox want in my domain? One does not have to guard his ox from causing damage within his own property, since another person's animal has no right to be there. The Mishnah continues, and one is liable for damage caused in a domain designated for the joint use of the injured party and the one liable for the damage. The Gemara cites a dispute concerning this case that results in two different ways of interpreting the Mishnah. Rav Chisda says that Avimi says, with regard to a courtyard designated for the joint use of two partners, either one of them is liable for damage caused by the ox of one partner to the property of the other partner while in it, both for the category of eating and for the category of trampling. And accordingly, this is what the Mishnah is saying. One is liable for damage caused in any place except for a domain designated exclusively for the use of the one responsible for the damage, as he is exempt there, but in a domain designated for the joint use of the injured party and the one responsible for the damage, when he causes damage, the one who is responsible for the damage is obligated to pay damages. The statement in the Mishnah concerning a domain designated for the joint use is beginning of the following clause and introduces a case in which one is liable for damage. Rabbi Elazar says, in a courtyard designated for joint use, one is exempt for one's ox causing damage to the property of his partner in the category of eating, and for one's ox causing damage to the property of his partner in the category of trampling. And accordingly, this is what the Mishnah is saying. One is liable for damage caused in any place except for a domain designated exclusively for the use of the one responsible for the damage, and the one is also exempt for damage done in a domain designated for the joint use of the injured party and the one liable for the damage. The statement in the Mishnah about a domain designated for joint use is a continuation of the previous clause and adds an additional case in which one is exempt. And the following clause, when one causes damage, the one liable for the damage is obligated to pay damages, serves to add the fact that one is liable for damage in the framework of the category of goring, which was not previously mentioned in the Mishnah. The interpretation of the concluding clause of the Mishnah as reference to goring works out well according to Shmuel in his dispute with Rav on 3b concerning the meaning of ox and maveh in the first Mishnah of this chapter. According to Shmuel, they mean trampling and eating, respectively, and goring has yet to be addressed. But according to Rav, who says the term ox in the Mishnah includes the damage caused by the ox and all matters involving damaging actions that are completed by an ox, including goring, eating, and trampling. Goring is already addressed in the Mishnah. What is added by the clause, the one liable for the damage is obligated to pay damages? The Gemara answers, it serves to add that which the sages taught in the Brisa that elucidates the Mishnah statement. The Mishnah states, when an animal or item one is responsible to safeguard causes damage, the one liable for the damage caused by insufficiently safeguarding it is obligated to pay payments of restitution for damage. This serves to include the cases of an unpaid bailee, a borrower, a paid bailee, and a renter, in which an animal, example an ox, caused damage while in their possession. If the ox was innocuous, he pays half of the damages, and if it was forewarned, he pays the full damages. If the ox was safely enclosed and a wall broke open at night, or if bandits, liston, broke it open and the ox went out and caused damage, he is exempt from liability. The Gemara analyzes the Brisa. The master said that the Mishnah states, when an animal or item one responsible to safeguard causes damage, the one liable for the damage caused by insufficiently safeguarding it is obligated to pay payments of restitution for damage. This serves to include the cases of an unpaid bailee, a borrower, a paid bailee, and a renter. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances? And for the sake of time, I believe we'll have to do a part 2 for 13b.